It is officially game day for the Detroit Lions. It's technically game day. It's very early, but I'm kind of awake. So we got some Detroit Lions news. The Lions are officially extending Jameson Williams. So let's get right into it. A little video to update the news. Today we got some extension news for the Lions. It started for me seeing Aidan Hutchinson, that the Lions had good conversations with Aidan Hutchinson. Likely that he would get an extension before the Lions season began, which they stated as today because of when that report came out. But alongside that, we were told that Jameson Williams had agreed to a 3-year extension. All of these early numbers, we'll have to figure out what the guarantees are going to be to that, and then really just see how they decide to set up this contract, which to me is the most interesting element of all of this. However, the Lions are getting ahead of this deal with Jamo, because remember, he had this year left on his deal and next year left on his deal, which was the 5th-year contract that the Lions exercised with both him and Aidan Hutchinson. So seemingly they're trying to get ahead of both of these contracts. Now, again, for the salary cap perspective, the Lions aren't set to have much money next season, but we don't know what the salary cap's going to be set at. We just know we have a lot of resources allocated already next year. So a big part of what the Lions were going to try to do seemingly was carry over a lot of money, as much as they seemingly could, up to meeting the minimum requirement rollover cap in the next season. And we know a big part of that as well was a guy like Zadarius Smith. The last day, Zadarius Smith has officially signed with the Philadelphia Eagles, which I got to admit, it hurt a little bit to see that happen, signing to a 1-year, $4.25 million deal that they're saying could work up to an $8.25 million deal. And I won't spend much time here, but with this contract, it's very incentive laden, though I don't know that these are actually expected to be earned incentives. There's unlikely to be earned, and there's likely to be earned incentives, which will count for different years of the cap. I don't know that they're considering these necessarily likely to be earned. One of the biggest incentives are sack total that is increasing. That can work up to $2.5 million for Zadarius Smith. I've heard 11. I don't know what that number is going to be set at. Then there's a Pro Bowl, $500K bonus, one tied along with an NFC Championship, one tied along with a Super Bowl appearance and playing a minimum number of snaps. But the interesting element to that is that it would have been a much cheaper contract based on those numbers, based on what we know about the Zadarius Smith contract now, versus what it would have been if the Lions would have just kept Zadarius Smith on that original contract, which would essentially been like 1 year, $11 million, because you would have had the void money for the next season and this year, which was over $5 million. So it would have been somewhere in that ballpark, but the Lions let him go, and seemingly they could have gotten him back based on that number alone if it was just a financial idea for a much cheaper price. But as we know, the Lions are trying to be very smart with that number. I'm not saying they weren't willing to pay that, but there's a chance that they weren't. That's how initially I thought it would play out. Then as we got closer and as the Frank Ragnow retirement happened, I thought eventually we would get Zadarius back, but we didn't. We know the Lions were being very smart with their money because they know what's coming down the road. And if they want to make these kind of moves, this is just what has to happen. 3-year, $83 million extension for Jamo puts him at $27.6 million per season, which is right next to DJ Moore, who I believe was 12th in terms of average annual salary for a receiver right now. This falls below St. Brown at $30 million per season. And a couple of other keynotes. First off, it was noted as this was up to $83 million, which means that this number will very likely not be as high on a per year basis as mentioned right there with DJ Moore. You're also now getting into this really the top number 2 receivers in football in terms of what they're getting paid. So there's other receivers that fall into this category. Devontae Smith, a good example, at $25 per year. So you'll probably get a similar number to something like that. Again, it's just years later, so you expect that that number is going to work out. And as always, the biggest thing to keep in mind with contracts is timing. Timing is everything. For the Lions side of things, the interior offensive line is essentially going to be as cheap as it can be for the Lions, depending on what they decide to do with Graham Glasgow. Even his contract isn't very expensive, but the Lions could get off of that. Both guards aren't being paid at this time. You're paying both of your tackles, so it's much cheaper than it was in the past when you had Kevin Zettler, who was taking up a little bit more of that cap space, and you were paying Graham Glasgow and Frank Ragnow. Now with that retirement, numbers start to pull back. So it's all about the timing within these deals. I don't think there's necessarily a process that has to be followed of you can't pay a number 2, but you can pay a number 2 corner, or you can pay a number 2 edge, but you can't pay a number 2 receiver. I don't think that necessarily equates, because for the Lions, they're building through the draft. So timing is going to be everything about when they draft certain positions. And for them right now, receivers were a little bit earlier. Offensive line has come in a little bit later here with Mahogany and most recently Tate Ratledge. So you should be able to, hopefully, as long as those guys hit, balance out some of these issues specifically. And I look at it from this perspective. While I was kind of the belief with Jamo, let it ride. Let's see how it plays out within the John Moore offense, and then I'd be willing to spend a little bit more, but have real clarity on where I want to spend and allocate these resources. The Lions were clearly in a good spot where they felt comfortable with, okay, we've seen enough. We think this is going to work. We're willing to pay this guy, because that's what they have to do. They have to pay guys that have earned it. And they felt to that point that he has. And I look at it from the perspective of, I think he is going to have a massive season. Like, they're, as much as I say that, I don't really see a scenario in which he doesn't have a big year. I think he's going to be incredibly involved in this offense. So my guess would be that he's going to push that price up. I just think that's very likely to happen, because I think his usage in a John Moran styled offense will just be very heavy. And we have seen, everything that we've seen from Jamo. We've seen consistent growth, over 1,000 yards this past year. So I'm not upset at all that they got ahead of this contract. And assuming he does what I think he's going to do this upcoming season, it's likely going to look back as, okay, this is a very good contract for Jameson Williams. It's just about that playing out, and then again balancing some of these other potential deals down the road. But Lions clearly valued what Jameson brought. And I think also the growth that he's having, the pace that he's on, I think how well he fits the Lions as well, the culture that he brings to the team, right? Kind of a bumpy start, but man, he's fitting really well, came back from injury. He's done all things right, really, since kind of a bumpy and shaky start. And his motivation and attitude seems always perfect for us. And then, of course, Aidan Hutchinson seems like they're going to get on top of that as well. The other interesting element is how this kind of lines up with everybody else, because Jared Goff, his contract officially ends in 2029, but there's really not any dead cap there. So that's when the Lions will be able to make a decision, how they want to go forward really in that 2028 season. They can do it there and potentially before that as well with Jared Goff. But a lot of these longer term deals are kind of ending in the same range. And if you look at a guy like Kirby Joseph, who they got done this offseason, but because of where he was at in his contract, he is set to become a free agent in 2030, just like Jameson Williams. The big key there, though, for Kirby Joseph is that he has a very significant void number, which we don't typically do, well over $30 million as a void year in 2030 when his contract does expire. So that's one of those interesting deals where you wondered, are the Lions going to do this with multiple players, kind of like Philly did or has done, and they have that for a couple of years in the future where they have tons of void money that's going to guys that just aren't going to be there? Or is this going to be where they're just going to try to balance it out? I truly believe the Lions are just going to try to balance this out, and that they're not going to just stack a whole bunch of guys in terms of void numbers in the same year. Now, of course, you can fold that into a new contract, but you still have to pay that money. It's not like it's going anywhere. The JMO's new deal, what is nice is they will have flexibility next year, because he does have the fifth-year option, $15.5 million, which is seemingly a bargain for a player of that price. They have cap projections that expect numbers to go really raise within the next few years. The Lions could also look at potentially folding his fifth-year option into that new deal as well, to potentially drop that cap hit next season as well, to add some flexibility, because it kind of seems like it's baked in. The Lions are going to be restructuring Goff in some way. There's going to have to be some of those moves that take place. Instead of just paying the full fifth-year option, they could definitely fold it back into a new deal. But my expectation is here with Jamo that they're not going to make this a massive void number. I expect there to be a void years to his contract to spread this out a bit, but I don't expect it to be a massive number like Kirby Joseph. I think it's going to be much more balanced, and he will be set to become a free agent in 2030, just like Kirby Joseph. And maybe that 2029 year just has more flexibility to potentially get out of the contract if you wanted to, but more likely to open up another path to get an extension there for Jameson Williams specifically. So I expect this to be much more balanced for Jamo. Smart with the resources that they spend. They just can't throw money away. And when I say throw money away, it's not any specific player. It's really just the idea of the guys that we are putting and investing this money in. You want to be very comfortable with believing that that player is going to be good for the years of that contract going forward, because of how many resources are actually going to be allocated there, and the more limited amount of players that can hit those kinds of numbers going forward. I thought that a big conversation in the future would have to be Jameson Williams versus Sam Laporta offensively. Now, it could shake out differently. That was just kind of my vision of it, because I think they would pay Brian Branch. I think they would pay a Jack Campbell. And based on the financials of that, even with that being tight, I thought, and it would still be tight, that one decision would have to be Sam Laporta versus Jameson. If you look at a guy like St. Brown and his contract, his final year of his contract, interestingly enough as well, also drops in terms of the cap number in that final year of his contract. He got the 4-year extension, same time that Penei Sewell did. Penei Sewell got his contract folded back into that 5th-year option. So the Lions may very well do that once again. St. Brown has a $16 million void number in 2029. So he actually expires a year before Jameson Williams' contract will now expire with the Lions. So his expires 1 year sooner. But if you look at it, the year before that, in 2028, his cap number actually drops a touch to $26 million. So that one is much more balanced out with a much more reasonable void type of number, which makes you believe that they're probably going to be prepared to give an extension at that time. So that's kind of how I expect the Jameson Williams deal to potentially look like as well, where that void number is much more reasonable. Maybe that last year, the cap number drops a bit, and it's a little bit heavier kind of in that second year specifically, maybe even the first year, as well as I expect next year they'll probably fold some of that deal back in, and they're probably going to drop that $15.5 million a little bit lower for the immediate future to open up some cap space to just create some sort of flexibility. That's kind of how I think this is going to shake out. But congratulations, Jameson Williams, kind of person seemingly that you want to have, that you want to lock up, and the Lions did just that. Now we wait on Aidan Hutchinson. I'm going to leave it there. And we thought Scott is flow. Thank you for watching, and I'm out.